Good afternoon. My name is Tony, and our team, group number 48, will be presenting on the topic of performance appraisals. We'll start off with myself providing a brief introduction and outline to why we think the appraisal process is integral to the success of organisations. Tommy will then continue on with the key theories associated with performance appraisals. Empirical evidence through journal articles will be discussed by Joanne and Chao, before a case study of our own Scott Rezenbrink will provide insight into the practical nature of results-orientated appraisals. Yue Xing will conclude our presentation, highlighting the key strengths and limitations we had discussed earlier. Performance appraisals, plain and simple, is defined as a process of measuring an employee's job performance. Though quite time-consuming, organisations implement an appraisal process to ensure an organisation is running successfully. From the first dot point on the left here, we can see that the appraisal process is essential in the motivation of staff members by implementing an appropriate development and reward system. These appraisals can also be used as data collection and justification for any employment decisions, for example, promotions and terminations. Lastly, employers will find performance appraisals valuable as it is a method of providing 360-degree feedback. That is, feedback from the ratee to the rater. The organisation can determine whether there are any gaps in the skills of the rater, whether they feel that they have been particularly subjective, or whether the reviews were performed in a timely manner. On the right here, you can see that performance appraisals are also valuable to employees themselves, as it provides a medium to identify any personal development needs and associated potential training, as well as a means to improve the performance in the organisation for their own career development. According to the Deloitte University Press, organisations are 4 times more likely to score in the top end of the 2014 Total Performance Index when performance appraisals are performed quarterly, highlighting how fundamental performance appraisals are to the success of an organisation.
There are 3 main appraisal methods available to employers that are different in nature. The first one is the trait-oriented rating method. The trait-oriented method involves the manager or supervisor evaluating the employee on the basis of observable dimensions of personality, such as integrity, honesty, dependability, punctuality, etc. This approach is the least effective, as it is difficult to identify which traits are suitable for the particular role, and how well employees actually display these traits on the job. Therefore, there is little correlation between possessing the correct traits and work performance. It is also difficult to accurately measure traits reliably. The behavior-oriented rating method focuses on observed behavior and observable incidents. There are some correlations between behavior and performance, however, it is very low and susceptible to errors. This method can also rely heavily on the subjectivity of the rater's perceptions, therefore making it unreliable. The theory we have chosen to use is the results-oriented appraisal method, also known as management by objectives, or MBO. This method is most commonly used by organizations in the Western world. The employees are asked to set up or help set their own performance goals. This avoids the feeling among employees that they are being judged by unfairly high standards, and is therefore easier to measure with less subjectivity. Furthermore, the employee is able to align their own goals in correspondence to that of the organization. Joanne will now outline some empirical evidence on the MBO performance appraisal method.
In a journal article entitled Managerial Perceptions of Two Appraisal Systems, Trait-Oriented and Results-Oriented Appraisal Systems were discussed. The article reveals that while the subjective trait approach is one of the most widely used appraisal techniques, it is also widely criticized, and instead many organizations are now adopting more results-oriented appraisal programs such as Management by Objectives, MBO. The article discusses a study that was undertaken over a 3-year period from 1976 to 1979 in order to establish employees' opinions of MBO implemented in an international petroleum company that was previously using a trait-oriented system. At the outset, the hypothesis was that under MBO, respondents would have a better understanding of how they were evaluated, perceive a clearer link between the performance and reward, and view feedback as much more objective and frequent than they would the trait approach. For the study, 87 managers were asked to fill out 2 questionnaires, one when the trait-oriented system was in place, and then one after the MBO were implemented. Mean scores from each item of both questionnaires were then obtained, and hypotheses were tested by analysing the differences between the two means. Results showed that 91% of employees appeared significantly more satisfied in the way they were evaluated under the MBO compared to that of the trait-oriented system. When employees were evaluated by results, they perceived that the supervisors were more interested in their work and that their work and ability were more appreciated. This created increasing motivation for employees, thus resulting in increased performance. Employees also indicated that feedback under MBO were more objective, which is a significant finding as research shows objective feedback produces higher performance, rapidity of learning, and employee satisfaction. In performance appraisal, it is imperative that individual and organisational goals be congruent and that the performance appraisal process reflect this. Under MBO, employee perception saw an improvement with job feedback and higher objectivity in wage, salary decisions, and promotions, thus indicating that, in this study, results-oriented systems are more preferable than trait-oriented.
In another journal article entitled A New Framework for Selection of the Best Performance Appraisal Method, 6 significant criteria were taken into account for the comparison of performance appraisal to determine the best appraisal method. MBO method was considered as the best performance appraisal method by mathematical calculation. Most specifically, criteria include the ability to distinguish staff's training needs, being free of error, motivation of staff for increased performance, ability to comply, cost of method, and coincidence with institutes. Each method can achieve 3 different scores corresponding to the level to meet the criterion. For example, narrative essay method with low cost have an intermediate ability to distinguish staff's training needs. Hence, narrative essay scored 3 points due to the low cost and scored 1 point for ability to distinguish staff's training needs. Next, this number were written in the format of matrix. The final score for each performance appraisal is determined by the operation of corresponding score for each criteria in the matrix. The mathematical results indicated that MBO ranked first, which means MBO is the best approach to apply in the organization. The result also revealed that the graphical rating scale and the narrative essay are most unproductive for performance appraisal. In conclusion, managers should select what the best suitable method is by thinking through all features of each method to make sure the appraisal can be done successfully and is best for the organization. In general, however, MBO is the most suitable method for performance appraisal.
For our case study, we have chosen to examine the performance appraisal system utilized by the professional services firm KPMG. KPMG uses a modified MBO-based system consisting of self-appraisal, peer-based review, and upwards-directed feedback. Our group obtained this information through my own professional experiences as an employee of KPMG, using the resources provided to employees as well as by performing independent research through online information. Initially, we also considered requesting information from the HR division at KPMG, though ultimately decided that this was not necessary. The performance appraisal system used by KPMG employs an MBO-style approach by advocating a SMART system of goal setting, which means that goals are encouraged to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. The process involves each employee setting goals online for different objectives that considers individual development, firm-wide aims, and job-related objectives on a semi-annual and job-specific basis. At the end of each fiscal year, there is a review in which employees are graded on their performance and awarded ratings. Upwards feedback is also included in the appraisal system, whereby any employee can give feedback on others regardless of position through an online submission portal. Guidance as to level appropriate goals are provided to the employees in template form, providing a rough expectation of what management expects of them at different points in their career. This is useful to the employee on a developmental and communicative basis, as well as to the organization, as it provides easier comparison across business levels. One example of why KPMG's performance appraisal system is effective is that each employee is able to set their own goals, allowing them to focus on individual areas of improvement and development. Particularly in respect to younger employees, this system is effective as it allows for the identification of process-driven measures that show a more detailed sense of progression, which, as Joanne mentioned earlier, can result in higher motivation and better performance. However, there could be improvements to KPMG's system, especially in comparability. As goals can be set voluntarily, it can be difficult to assess goals and performance when comparing employees in the existing system. The organization must ultimately consider the appropriateness of each individual's goals, the difficulty of the goal, and whether the goal has been successfully met.
In fact, performance appraisal have their unique functions towards the success of organizations, which have achieved in the increased effort of work, efficient productivity, and enhanced level of quality and interpersonal competence. In order to gain these outcomes, organizations need to adapt a series of actions responding to the appraisal to make sure they're integrating with the organization's goals and policies. Notably, the identification of their strengths and limitations affect the organization, whether it needs to expand or reduce the effect of the appraisals. One of the strengths is to evaluate actual performance against expected performance of an employee, which organizations can decide whether to reward or criticize the employee. Appraisals can also identify strengths, weaknesses, job knowledge, skills, and commitment of the employee, as well as they provide an open communication between supervisors and employees. Those strengths are more likely to be expanded in order to motivate employees, whereas the effect of limitations is more likely to be reduced for long-term goals. Employees can be unproductive due to the unfair evaluation of their performance. Sometimes the feedback can be based on the supervisor's personal dislikes and likes. Another key point is appraisals have been criticized because people thought they're affected by office politics. With this in mind, some supervisors or managers do find it hard to judge his opponents, which tends to cause a crack in relationships, especially for the results-oriented appraisals. The limitations can cause low employees' job satisfaction, where it is highly dependent on supervisors' availability and ability, as well as it has more emphasis on outcomes rather than processes, which might cause uncomfortable job environment towards employees and affect long-term goals of the organization. Therefore, there are still bits and pieces of performance appraisals that need to be carefully considered before they're ready to operate in the organization.